That bastard is not my grandson. My mother-in-law shouted those words at my own baby shower, right after throwing a pile of my hand-wrapped gifts straight into the trash. 50 of our closest friends and family members froze. The room went so quiet you could hear a fork hit a porcelain plate. I didn't scream. I didn't run away in tears. I calmly walked over to the $600 tiered cake we'd bought for the occasion. My mother-in-law smirked at me, thinking she had finally humiliated me enough to break me. She had no idea what I was holding. I slid a sealed clinic envelope under her plate. It was a piece of paper that didn't just prove her wrong, it proved her golden boy son was hiding a secret that was about to burn her precious reputation to the ground. When she opened it, she literally collapsed onto the hardwood floor. What happened next didn't just end a party. It dismantled years of cruel lies and permanently shattered their picture-perfect family image. My name is Chloe. I'm 28 years old. Now let me take you back. The night Derek and I told his mother about the pregnancy, she said, "Well, just that, one word." She looked at Derek, not at me, and set her wine glass down with a careful click, the specific kind of careful that tells you a response has already been decided, and then she said it again. Well, I was 8 weeks along. I had spent 45 minutes doing my hair that evening because some part of me still believed that if I showed up polished, warm, and ready to be embraced, she would eventually look at me the way she looked at the photographs of Derek's childhood that covered every wall of her house. Like something she had chosen. Like something worth keeping. She didn't say congratulations. She poured herself a second glass of wine. I should tell you something about Patricia Whitmore before I go any further. She was a retired school principal, 31 years running Lincoln Elementary in Claremont Hills, where people still greeted her by last name in the grocery store and meant it respectfully. She ran the women's auxiliary at her church. She chaired 3 committees I could never keep straight. She wore the same pearl earrings every Sunday, and she delivered her opinions in the same measured register she must have used for decades when summoning parents to her office. Calm, clear, final. She was very good at sounding reasonable while being devastating. The first time I met her, Derek and I had been dating 2 months. Sunday dinner at her house, pot roast on the table, garden flowers in a vase on the counter. She asked what I did. I told her I was a medical records coordinator at St. Harlow Regional. She nodded once. Support staff, she said, not unkindly, just flatly. The way you'd say service elevator. I said yes. Derek squeezed my hand under the table. He did that a lot in those early years, that quick, reassuring pressure that said, "Don't worry, that's just how she is." I spent a long time mistaking that squeeze for defense. Patricia never said anything that could be quoted back directly. She didn't say "you're not good enough for my son." She said things like, "Chloe seems like a capable person," in a tone that made capable sound like a consolation. She didn't say "I don't like her." She said, "I'm sure she means well," which was the conversational equivalent of a door held politely but firmly shut. Derek heard none of it, or heard it and decided that maintaining peace between us was a workable arrangement. Same result either way. By the time we got married, 22 months in, I had made a calculation I am not proud of. I decided that Patricia's opinion of me was Derek's problem to manage, and I was going to let him manage it. I told myself she was protective the way some mothers are, and that once I had given her enough time and enough evidence of my own stability, she would soften. I told myself all of this with great conviction, the way you tell yourself a thing when the alternative is too large to look at. That calculation cost me more than I understood. At the pregnancy announcement dinner, after Derek told her, after the 2 wells and the second wine, Patricia asked a series of practical questions. How far along? Prenatal vitamins, insurance coverage. She never touched my hand, she never said she was happy. Then she helped clear the table. I was at the kitchen sink when I heard her in the doorway behind me asking Derek in a quieter voice whether everything had been planned. He said yes. She said, "You're sure?" He said, "Mom, yes." She went quiet. She wasn't asking if the pregnancy was intentional. She was asking if he was sure the baby was his. I kept my hands under the running water. I didn't turn around. That was the moment. Not the first cold shoulder, not the first measured insult, but that question, delivered in her own kitchen while I stood 3 feet away. That was when I understood that whatever came next would be bigger than I had prepared for. Then something small happened that I almost missed. Patricia came back into the kitchen. Her voice returned to its normal register and mentioned she needed to call Michael Kellerman before Friday about some arrangements. She said it while looking at Derek, not at me. Derek said he'd remind her. Something moved between them, not words exactly, more like the practiced quiet of people who know how to speak around a subject. I had been part of Derek's life for over 2 years. Every family dinner, every birthday, every Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve. I had never heard that name. I didn't ask. On the drive home, Derek took my hand on the center console. "She's excited," he said. "She just has a hard time showing it." I said, "I know." I didn't know. But I was beginning to understand something about the gap between what Derek believed about his mother and what his mother actually was, and that I had been standing inside that gap the whole time without a map. When I got home, I typed the name into my phone. Michael Kellerman, a landscaper in Ohio, a retired accountant in Georgia, nothing that connected to anything. I put the phone down, but I kept the name. I saved it in a note I labeled, simply, questions. By the time that folder had 14 entries, I was 20 weeks pregnant, and Patricia had already started telling people the baby wasn't Derek's. I found out what Patricia was saying the way you find out most things in a tight-knit family circle, not directly, and not from the person causing the damage. My friend Renata called me on a Wednesday evening in my 20th week. I was eating cereal standing over the kitchen sink because the smell of cooked food still made me nauseous. Renata had been at Derek's cousin's birthday gathering the previous weekend, a low-key backyard thing I'd skipped because I'd been exhausted. She started the call the way people start calls when they're about to say something uncomfortable. Small talk first. How was I feeling? Was I sleeping? Then a pause. "Someone said something at Jesse's party," she said. I wasn't going to mention it, but Chloe, it came from Patricia. Someone repeated it to me directly. I set the bowl down. She told Jesse's mother that Derek is working through some personal difficulties, that the pregnancy has raised some questions he's trying to process privately. I waited. She said she wasn't convinced the baby was his. There it was. Not a kitchen doorway whisper this time, not a lowered voice aimed at Derek while I stood close enough to hear. A real statement made at a real gathering to people who would repeat it. She had moved the lie outside the house. I thanked Renata and stayed calm on the phone. Then I stood in my kitchen for a long time without picking up the bowl again. Here is what I want you to understand about the specific cruelty of that lie. Derek and I had been together 3 years at that point. Faithful, fully committed years. I had never given him a reason to doubt me. I had never given Patricia a reason to doubt me either, not that she'd needed one. The accusation wasn't something she had arrived at through concern or confusion. It was a weapon she had selected. She had looked at the situation, her son expecting a child with a woman she had never accepted, and decided that the most effective way to destabilize it was to plant a question she knew neither of us could comfortably answer publicly. Paternity is the kind of question that sticks even after it's answered. Even if everyone eventually learned the truth, some version of that seed would stay in the room. She knew that. I told Derek that night. I sat across from him at the kitchen table and told him exactly what Renata had said, including that it had come from Patricia directly. He went quiet. That particular quiet of his that I had learned to read, the one that meant he was not so much processing what I'd told him as arranging his response to minimize the fallout in every direction simultaneously. "That doesn't sound like something she'd say in that context," he said finally. "Derek, Renata was standing there. I know, I'm not saying Renata is lying, I'm saying maybe it was taken out of context. My mother has a way of she phrases things. She told Jesse's mother that the baby might not be yours." He rubbed his face. "I'll talk to her." I want to be fair here. He did talk to her. He called her the following morning while I was at work. I know this because he told me he had, and because he came home that evening looking mildly relieved, which was the expression Derek got when he had managed to smooth something over without anyone having to fully admit wrongdoing. "She says she was talking about how unexpected the pregnancy was and it got misrepresented," he said. "That is not a misrepresentation. She apologized. To you," he paused. "Yeah, not to me. Never to me." The apology traveled through Derek the way everything in that family traveled through Derek, filtered, softened, redirected, and arrived in my direction already stripped of accountability. I said, "Okay." I added the incident to my notes folder. Date, source, content, Derek's response. Then I added a second entry below it, because this was the same week I noticed something else. We had registered at 2 stores for the shower. The registry login was tied to a shared email account Derek and I had set up for household things. I went in to check what had been purchased, and I noticed that someone had accessed the account 5 days earlier and removed 6 items from the registry. Not moved them, deleted them. Items I had specifically chosen: a convertible bassinet, a specific brand of nursing pillow, a monitor system I'd researched for 2 weeks. Derek's email was connected to that account. So was a recovery address. The recovery address was Patricia's. I took a screenshot. I didn't say anything to Derek yet. I wanted to understand what I was looking at before I handed him another thing to explain away. That was the shift in how I started operating. Quieter, more careful, less willing to hand over the evidence while I was still gathering it. It wasn't a strategy I had designed from the beginning, it was something the situation was teaching me, one explained-away incident at a time. I had a prenatal appointment that Friday with Dr. Salinas. At the end of the appointment, while she was filling in my chart, I asked her what genetic testing was available through the clinic. She listed a few options. I asked if any of them could confirm paternity prenatally, non-invasively. She looked up from the chart. "Yes, there's a prenatal paternity test. It's done through a blood draw and it's non-invasive." I told her I didn't doubt my husband. She nodded without changing expression. I told her I had a reason to want documentation. She said she understood completely and referred me to the right department. I scheduled the test for the following week. I paid for it out of my own account, from money I had been putting away since before Derek and I were married. The folder in my phone now had 3 entries, a screenshot, and a pending appointment. I drove home with the windows down because the autumn air felt like the only thing I could control at that moment. I remember thinking, clearly, without panic, she thinks she is unraveling me. She has no idea she's just given me a reason to document everything. The test would take 10 business days to return results. I spent that time watching. The paternity test results came back in 11 days. The report confirmed what I already knew. Derek was the father, probability above 99.9%. I saved the file to a new folder in my cloud storage, printed 1 copy, and sealed it in an envelope that I kept in my desk drawer at work. I told no one, not because I planned to hold it as a secret forever, but because I wanted to understand the full shape of what Patricia was doing before I decided when and how to use any of it. She was building something. I wanted to see the whole structure before I touched it. The week the results came back, Patricia called Derek to arrange a Sunday dinner. She did this every few weeks anyway. Derek's parents' house, his parents' table, conversations conducted in a careful code I had spent years learning to decode. In our early relationship, I had read hostility into things that were genuinely neutral. I had overcorrected. I had adjusted my reactions so many times to keep Derek comfortable that I had eventually stopped trusting my own readings entirely. I was done adjusting. We arrived on a Sunday in late October. Patricia's sister Lynn was already there. Unusual, but not alarming. What was unusual was that Lynn had brought her daughter Cassidy, someone I had met exactly twice, who sat at the table with the attentiveness of someone who had been given a reason to come. Dinner was smooth on the surface. Gerald, Derek's father, asked about kick counts and nursery colors and names. Patricia answered several of these questions before I could, inserting herself into the conversation with a practiced casualness I had long since stopped mistaking for warmth. She was not being warm. She was positioning. Then Cassidy asked, offhand, whether we had done the full genetic panel. I looked at her. "The prenatal screening," she said, still smiling. "I have a friend in obstetrics. She said with certain risk factors, it's worth being comprehensive." I said we were working closely with our doctor. "Of course," Patricia said, "Chloe has always been very thorough." The way she said thorough was designed to carry a second meaning, something like secretive, something like evasive. She said it and looked at Lynn, not at me, and Lynn gave a small nod that I was not supposed to catch. I caught it. I looked at Derek. He was eating. He had not heard the same sentence I had heard. That was the thing I kept running into. Derek and I were not listening to the same conversations. I heard subtext because I had been trained to survive inside it. He heard the surface because he had always been allowed to live there. After dinner, while the men moved to the living room and Lynn helped Patricia clear the table, Cassidy followed me to the kitchen with a stack of plates. We were briefly alone. "My aunt means well," she said, the tone of someone reading from a script she hadn't fully memorized. "I know," I said. "She just worries about Derek." I rinsed a glass. "That's natural." "Right," she set the plates down. "She mentioned that you two were having some tensions before the pregnancy." I turned off the faucet. "I'm not sure where she heard that," Cassidy blinked. "I assumed Derek had told her." I turned and looked directly at her. "Derek and I are not having tensions." She went back to the dining room without another word. I stood at the sink and thought about what that meant. Either Patricia had told her family an outright lie to reinforce the original implication about the baby, or Derek had said something to his mother that he had not said to me. I didn't know which was worse. I said nothing to Derek on the drive home. I opened my notes folder and added a new entry. The date, the attendees, the exchange with Cassidy, the moment Patricia said thorough while looking at Lynn. 2 days later, Priya at my office mentioned she had run into Rosalind, Derek's aunt, a woman who had always been genuinely kind to me, at a grocery store. Rosalind had asked how I was doing. Priya had said I was great, that the pregnancy was going well, that everyone at the office was excited. Rosalind had said, "I hope everything sorts itself out." Priya had found the phrasing odd enough to mention it. I knew exactly what it meant. Patricia had not limited the story to a birthday party, to one family friend, to her own sister. She was running it outward through the extended network in a quiet, steady radius. By now she had told enough people a version of events that sorts itself out made sense in context. Something was unresolved. Something was in question. Derek's wife was uncertain, problematic, complicated in a way that couldn't quite be stated plainly, but could be implied in 4 words at a checkout line. That is the particular cruelty of that kind of campaign. You don't have to accuse directly. You create an atmosphere of doubt and then let other people's discomfort fill in the rest. She was good at it, practiced. She had probably been running versions of it in rooms I had never entered. I called Renata that evening and told her everything. Priya's encounter, the dinner with Cassidy, the kitchen comment about being thorough. Renata listened without interrupting. "She's building the story before the baby arrives," Renata said. "So when you say something later, it already sounds like you're defending yourself." "Exactly." A pause. "What did you do with the test?" "Desk drawer at work, cloud backup." "Good. Then do you want me to write down what I heard at Jessie's party, formally, with the date?" I hadn't asked her to. She'd arrived there on her own. "Yes," I said. "Please." I had a sealed envelope in a desk drawer, a screenshot of a registry intrusion, and now a witness willing to put her account in writing. I didn't know yet what I was building. I only knew I needed everything in one place before Patricia did something I couldn't walk back from, or before she finally convinced Derek of something that couldn't be unsaid. The baby moved twice before I fell asleep. I kept my hand on the spot until she settled. The baby shower was supposed to be at Rosalind's house, Derek's aunt on his father's side, the one woman in that family who had consistently treated me like a person rather than an inconvenience. She had offered the space weeks earlier, and I had accepted gratefully. That had been the plan. I found out it had changed when Rosalind called me herself. Her voice had that careful quality of someone who had been placed in a position they hadn't chosen. "I want to tell you directly," she said. Patricia reached out to everyone on the guest list. She mentioned some concerns about the space. She said she'd handle the rescheduling herself. I held the phone without answering for a moment. "Are you all right, Chloe?" "Yes," I said. "Thank you for calling me." I hung up and sat with what I had just been told. Patricia had gone through a list of 40-odd names and numbers, contact information Derek had passed along months earlier in what had seemed like a routine exchange, and she had personally called everyone and redirected the event. Without contacting me, without informing Derek as far as I knew. She had simply called each person and moved them, using fabricated concerns about Rosalind's home as the vehicle. She had taken over my baby shower, and not just logistically. The subtext was clear. She was inserting herself into the visible center of my pregnancy in a way that 40 people would now experience as normal, as generous, as simply what a devoted grandmother-to-be does. Not Chloe organizing things for her own child. Patricia managing everything because Patricia was the one you could trust. I called Derek. He knew something. Not all of it. He said he hadn't known about the guest list calls, but he had known his mother expressed interest in helping more with the shower. Used those words exactly, helping more. She removed Rosalind from her own event, I said, and called 40 people without telling me. Chloe, without asking me. "I know how it looks. What does it look like to you, Derek?" He exhaled. "I'll call her." I said, "Okay," and put the phone down. I want to be precise about something. By this point, I had been managing the accumulated weight of Patricia's campaign for months, and every single incident had traveled through Derek as a filter. That's not what she meant. She was just trying to help. She didn't realize. He believed those explanations, or he needed to. I had been measuring out my energy carefully, calculating which battles would cost me more than they cost her, and choosing silence every time. But this one had extended outside the private family circle into a space I couldn't quietly contain. Rosalind wasn't going to make a scene about it. She was too measured for that, but she knew. She had been displaced from a role she had volunteered for, using a reason that wasn't real, by her own sister-in-law. 40 people were now receiving a social fact. Patricia is the one organizing things, without any of the context that would make that fact legible as what it actually was. I couldn't manage this alone anymore. I had a colleague at my firm named Sandra, steady, private, someone I trusted. She had navigated a complicated family legal situation a few years earlier and had come out of it with a certain quality of hard-won clarity that doesn't announce itself. I asked her quietly whether she knew a family attorney, someone thorough. She gave me a name and a number. Her name was Claire Mercer. Calm office, framed credentials, the professional stillness of someone who has heard every version of every family story without being surprised by any of them. I sat across from her and told her everything from the beginning. The comment at Jesse's party, the registry intrusion and the recovery email address, the dinner with Cassidy, Priya's encounter with Rosalind, the shower rerouting, the dated notes folder, the sealed envelope, the cloud backup. She wrote on a yellow legal pad and didn't interrupt. When she finished, she tapped the pad once. The registry access, you still have the screenshot? Yes. Keep it backed up in at least 2 separate locations. She reviewed her notes. The paternity allegation, if she repeats that in a context that causes you material damage, that becomes actionable. The rest of this documents a pattern of deliberate social pressure, hard to litigate on its own but very useful if the pattern escalates. I'm not looking to sue anyone, I said. I understand, she said, but knowing you could changes how you move through this. You're not without options. The documentation is what gives you options. That was the word I needed. Not revenge, not confrontation. Options. I drove home in late afternoon light, windows down, the city ordinary around me. 31 weeks pregnant. My daughter was going to arrive into a family where one person had already spent months constructing a narrative designed to make her mother look unstable, unfaithful, unworthy of trust, and had done it carefully enough that even my own husband couldn't always see it clearly. Patricia was still calling contacts, adjusting the social facts, positioning herself at the center. She had no way of knowing that I had stopped absorbing and started documenting, that the folder was real, that a lawyer now knew my name and had written 2 pages of notes about what I had seen. She was still performing for an audience she assumed was unaware. She had stopped checking whether I was watching. That was her first real mistake. Renata's written statement arrived by email on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks before the rescheduled shower. She had typed it herself, single-spaced, 2 pages. She had included the full date, the location, Jesse's living room, the birthday party, the names of the 2 women who had been standing near her when Patricia spoke, and a verbatim account of the exact words she had heard. At the bottom she had written, "I am prepared to confirm this account in any setting where it would be useful." I forwarded it to Claire Mercer before I got out of bed. Then I showered, drove to work, and sat at my desk and thought about the fact that my mother-in-law had spent several months trying to convince everyone around me that my child was not my husband's, and that I now had a lawyer, a sealed paternity test, a registered witness account, and documented evidence of unauthorized access to a private registry. 4 months into pregnancy, I had been trying to keep the peace. Now at 32 weeks, I had a folder. That afternoon, Claire called back. Her voice had the same professional steadiness it always carried. She said Renata's account was clear and credible. She said it confirmed the pattern already established by the other documentation. She said, "Keep everything stored. Don't confront Patricia. Let her keep moving." "She's building her own case against herself," Claire said. "Don't interrupt that." I understood. 3 days later, Rosalind called again. This time, she wasn't relaying information. She asked if I would meet her for lunch. We sat across from each other at a small Italian place she had chosen, neutral ground, clearly deliberate. She ordered soup she didn't touch and looked at me the way someone looks when they have been deciding for a long time whether to say something. She had known Patricia for 26 years. She said that first so I understood the weight of what came next. There is a version of events, she said carefully, that Patricia has been sharing with certain members of the family. It started before Jesse's party. I think it started earlier than you know. I set down my fork. She told Gerald's sister in August that there were inconsistencies in your account of a business trip you took in early spring. Rosalind's hands stayed flat on the table. She implied that Derek had discovered something and didn't know how to address it. August. The baby had been confirmed in June. That was before the party, I said. Yes. I thought about Cassidy at the dinner table, showing up with no real explanation. I thought about sorts itself out in the grocery store checkout line. August was 2 months before Jesse's party. Patricia hadn't spontaneously aired a suspicion at a birthday celebration. The birthday party was not the origin. It was the most visible point of something she had already been circulating for months. How many people? I asked. Rosalind paused. I don't know the full reach. I know Gerald's sister. I know at least one person from your neighborhood who Patricia connected with through Derek's cousin. She stopped. I'm telling you because I think you already know most of this, and I think you deserve to hear it from someone who isn't pretending it isn't happening. That sentence sat in the air between us. Thank you, I said. She reached across the table and briefly covered my hand. Not dramatic, not performative. Just a quiet human acknowledgement. I drove back to work and added August to my notes folder. Estimated start of campaign, pre-pregnancy confirmation. That changed the shape of everything. Patricia had not reacted to news of the pregnancy with suspicion. She had introduced the suspicion before she could have had any practical reason to doubt the pregnancy, which meant the doubt was not the point. The narrative was the point. She was not questioning my faithfulness because something made her wonder. She was building a version of me that made Derek seem like someone who should be uncertain about his wife, malleable inside his own marriage, more dependent on his family's interpretation of events than on his own. That was the engine underneath all of it. I kept that to myself for a few days. Then I sat down with Derek on a Sunday evening and I told him what Rosalind had said. Not everything, not the lawyer, not the full documentation, but the timeline, that it had started in August. That it had reached Gerald's sister, that the neighborhood contact existed. He was quiet for a long time. Why didn't Rosalind tell me? He asked. Because she was telling me, I said. She figured I should know first. He sat with his elbows on his knees. This was the version of Derek I had the most faith in, the quiet one who was actually thinking rather than deflecting. He didn't reach for an explanation that protected his mother. He didn't ask me if I was sure. He sat there and absorbed it. I'm going to talk to her, he finally said. I know. I mean it this time, Chloe. I know you do, I said, and I believed him. I also knew that Derek talking to Patricia would not stop what was already moving. She had too much infrastructure in place, too many people carrying versions of her story, too many conversations already seeded into the extended network. A difficult talk with her son would produce apology or deflection, and then the apparatus would resume, quieter, more careful. What I needed was not Derek confronting her. What I needed was the right moment, the right room, the right audience, something that gave the truth a public address instead of letting it stay trapped in private conversations she could always deny. The baby shower was 6 weeks out. Patricia was organizing it. She had already sent the invitations. The shower invitations went out on a Tuesday. Patricia had designed them herself, cream card stock, a small illustration of a bassinet, Derek's family name printed in script across the top. Not our last name together, his family name, the one she still used as a signal. By Thursday, I had received 3 texts. The first was from a woman named Diane, a friend of Derek's, mother from her book club, someone I had met exactly twice. She texted, "So glad you two are working through things." Can't wait to celebrate. The second was from Derek's cousin Marla, who texted, Derek seems good. You both seem good. Looking forward to seeing you. The third was from a neighbor I barely knew, someone who lived 4 streets over and whose connection to this shower I had never understood. Rooting for you. 3 separate messages. 3 separate tones. All of them pointed in the same direction. Working through things, you both seem good. Rooting for you. Patricia had sent invitations. She had also sent context. Not a group message. Not a single announcement. Individual contacts, timed to land with the invitation so that each recipient received both the event and the framing simultaneously. The same architecture Rosalind had described, surgical, personal, designed to arrive before I could offer a different story. I forwarded all 3 texts to Claire Mercer. She replied within the hour. This is the pattern confirming itself in writing. Screenshot, timestamp, save. Do not respond to any of them yet. I didn't. The next morning I drove to Claire's office without an appointment and she fit me in between meetings. I laid my phone on her desk and walked her through all 3 messages. Then I opened my notes folder and showed her the full timeline. August entry, Rosalind's lunch account, Renata's written statement, the registry screenshot, the paternity test documentation, date of the test, lab name, result, the sealed copy in my filing cabinet, and the scanned backup in cloud storage. She read everything in sequence without speaking. When she finished, she sat back and said, How many people do you expect at the shower? 43 on the final list, I said. Patricia sent it to me. She wanted me to feel included in the planning. Claire didn't change expression, but something in her stillness sharpened. And what does Derek know right now? He knows the August timeline. He knows Rosalind's account. He doesn't know about you, the documentation package, or the test. I paused. He's had 2 conversations with his mother. After the first one, she cried and said she was only trying to protect him. After the second one, she told him she was hurt that he was taking my word over hers. Claire tapped her pen once. Classic redirect. She looked back at her notes. The paternity test result. Can I see the lab document itself? I pulled it up on my phone and handed it across the desk. She read it, looked at the date, looked at the lab name, handed the phone back. You want my honest assessment, she said. Yes. You have enough that she cannot walk away from a direct confrontation in front of witnesses without either confirming the lie or producing an accusation she cannot support. She set her pen down. The test alone ends the paternity narrative in 1 sentence. The written statement from Renata establishes she said it publicly. The texts from this week establish she's still doing it. The August timeline establishes that this wasn't a reaction to anything, it was a campaign. She paused. 43 people are walking into a room that Patricia has already prepared for her version of events. You can let that room stay hers, or you can bring the truth into it. I looked at the window behind her desk. The street outside was ordinary. A delivery truck, a woman walking a dog, a bus pulling away from a stop. I'm not going to ambush anyone, I said. I don't want a scene for its own sake. Then don't think of it as a scene, Claire said. Think of it as a correction. She made 43 people carriers of a false story. A correction doesn't require theater. It requires evidence, timing, and nerve. I drove home and sat in the nursery for a long time. The crib was assembled. The mobile Derek had put together with focused, careful hands turned slowly near the window. I had painted one wall a warm, pale yellow in the 2nd trimester when I still believed the main challenge ahead of me was sleep deprivation. I opened my laptop and printed 2 copies of Renata's written statement. I printed the registry screenshot with the metadata intact. I printed a clean timeline document, 12 entries, each dated, each sourced. I printed the lab cover sheet from the paternity test. Not the full report, just the cover sheet. Date, patient name, result, signature. I put everything in a manila envelope. I sealed it. I wrote nothing on the outside. I placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, under a file labeled Utilities 2023, between two folders no one would ever voluntarily open. Then I backed up every digital version of every document to a second cloud account that Patricia didn't know existed and Derek hadn't seen. That evening, Derek came home and found me at the kitchen table eating leftovers and reading a novel. Stood in the doorway for a moment. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "How was your day?" He told me about his day. We talked about something on television. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder when he passed me on the way to the kitchen, the ordinary affectionate touch of a person who doesn't know what is already in motion. I let it be ordinary. Patricia thought she was walking into a room she had already built and decorated and filled with her own version of the story. She had been thorough. She had been careful. She had done everything right by her own logic. She just hadn't accounted for the fact that I had been just as thorough, and I had the documentation to prove it. The shower was 11 days out when Patricia sent me a coordination update by email. 4 paragraphs, the caterer, the floral arrangement, the games she had chosen, a note at the bottom informing me that she had taken the liberty of arranging seating to help everyone feel comfortable and welcome. She had also written a speech. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Claire Mercer, who replied, "Still building, let her." The seating diagram arrived 2 days later, sent to Derek's email, which he forwarded with a question mark. I looked at it for a long time. My seat was at the far end of the table from where Patricia had placed herself. Between us were Diane from the book club, Derek's cousins, the neighbor 4 streets over, everyone who had received the pre-shower framing texts, clustered together. Rosalind was near the kitchen. Priya, my closest friend, had been placed at a corner table with 2 women she had never met. It was not accidental. She had arranged the room exactly the way she had arranged the narrative herself at the center, and everyone she hadn't already managed at the edges. 43 people organized into a room that already belonged to her version of the story before anyone walked through the door. I printed the seating chart and added it to the envelope. The logistical move happened 8 days out. I called Renata on a Tuesday evening. She answered on the second ring. "Will you be at the shower?" I asked. She had been invited. Patricia had included her, I suspected, because removing her would have looked conspicuous. Renata had RSVP'd yes without mentioning it to me, which was the right instinct. "I'll be there," she said. "Do you need me to do anything? Just be there, and if something happens, if I need you to confirm what you told me in that written statement in that room in front of those people, I need to know you'll do it." She was quiet for a moment. "Chloe, I wrote that statement because I meant every word of it. Yes." I thanked her and stayed on the phone a few seconds longer than was practical. There was something I hadn't anticipated in that moment, just the plain human fact of not carrying this completely alone anymore. The emotional move happened 5 days out. I sat down with Derek, not to build a case, not to manage him in advance. I sat with him in the kitchen after dinner and told him what was true. "Something is going to happen at the shower," I said. "I'm not going to tell you everything before it happens, because I think if I do, you'll try to stop it. And it needs to happen." He set down his glass. "I'm not going to embarrass you," I said. "I'm not going to make a spectacle, but your mother has been running a specific campaign against me since August, before the baby was confirmed, Derek, before we even announced anything, and she has done it through individual, personal contacts designed to move people to her side before I could offer any other version of events. 43 of those people are going to be in a room next week. I need to correct the record while they're all there." He looked at me the way he had looked at the ceiling 3 months ago when I first told him things that didn't fit the version of his mother he carried around in his chest. "What do you have?" he said. "More than she thinks. Will you show me?" "After," I said. If I show you now, you'll spend 5 days deciding whether to warn her. He didn't argue with that. I need you to trust me, I said. I need you to sit at that table and let me handle it without stepping in to protect her. The silence lasted long enough that I felt it. She's my mother, he said. I know. That doesn't mean she was right. I know that too. He looked at the table, then at me. Okay, he said. That one word cost him something real. I understood what I was asking. I didn't minimize it. The risk move came 3 days out. Diane, the book club woman who had texted working through things, called me. Her number appeared because Patricia had CC'd me on a coordination email chain and left my number visible in the reply all thread. Diane was warm in the way people are warm when they believe they are performing kindness. She said she was glad everything was coming together. She said, Patricia mentioned you've had a stressful few months. We're all just rooting for this family. Rooting for this family, as if the family were a project in danger of collapse and the danger had a known source. I made a decision. Diane, I said, I want to be straightforward with you. I think you've been given some information that isn't accurate, and I think you deserve to know that before next week. There's nothing to root for in the way you're describing. Derek and I are not in crisis. We're having a baby. Whatever you've heard, I'd ask you to hold it loosely until you've seen us together in that room. She went quiet. Then, of course. We ended the call. I sat in the nursery afterward and breathed through it. That was the risk. Diane might call Patricia immediately. Patricia might recalibrate, might cancel the shower or confront me on her own terms before I had the room. She had enough relational infrastructure to pivot fast if she knew something was moving toward her. But I didn't think she would. I thought Patricia had spent so many months unchallenged that a cautious phone call from me would read as anxiety rather than preparation. She would file it under Chloe is nervous and do nothing differently. I thought right. The morning of the shower, she sent me a cheerful text. Can't wait to celebrate you and the baby today. See you at noon. 43 people. White tablecloths. Rosalind placed near the kitchen. Renata with her written statement committed to memory. My manila envelope at the bottom of my bag, underneath a change of shoes and a small packet of crackers I had packed for the nausea. Patricia at the center of a room she had spent months assembling. She thought she had prepared for every version of today. She had prepared for a woman who was still absorbing. She had not prepared for me. The venue Patricia had chosen was a private room at the back of a garden restaurant, white tablecloths, a small podium near the window, pale pink peonies in low arrangements down the center of the long table. It looked exactly like what it was. A room someone had spent considerable time designing to look a specific way. I arrived at 11:50. Derek dropped me off and was not invited inside. The shower was women only, Patricia's choice, which I understood better now than I had when she announced it. 43 women in one room. No husbands. No outside witnesses of a particular kind. Just Patricia's network, organized and seated, ready to celebrate in the frame she had built for them. I wore a navy dress. My hair was neat. I had slept 4 hours and felt completely awake in the way that you do when something important is finally about to happen instead of just hanging over you. Renata was already there when I arrived, standing near the gift table with a glass of water. We made eye contact across the room. She gave me one small nod. Rosalind was near the kitchen entrance, which was exactly where Patricia had placed her. I found my seat, far end of the table, just as the diagram had indicated. Diane from the book club was 2 seats to my left, already deep in conversation. The neighbor 4 streets over was directly across. Both of them greeted me with the particular warmth of people who have been told to be encouraging. Patricia was at the center of the table. She was wearing a cream blazer. Her hair was done. When she saw me, she crossed the room with both arms open and embraced me the way you embrace someone you have publicly claimed to love. "You look beautiful," she said into my ear. "How are you feeling?" Very well, I said. Thank you for all of this. She held my face in both hands for a moment, long enough for the room to see it, and then moved on. I set my bag under my chair. I felt the weight of the envelope inside it. The first hour moved the way these things move. Food arrived. Someone organized a gift-opening game that involved writing predictions on small cards. There was laughter. Patricia told a story about Derek as a toddler that the room received warmly. She was good at this, at filling a room with the feeling of her own benevolence. I participated. I laughed when it was appropriate. I thanked people. I was present and functional and gave Patricia no visible signal that anything was different from any other day. At 12:45, she stood and moved to the small podium near the window. I want to say a few words, she said, and the room settled. She had written a speech. She had told me so in the coordination email. I had expected something celebratory, perhaps slightly pointed in its framing, the kind of speech that manages to center the speaker while appearing to honor the subject. That was her style, and I had been watching it for 3 years. What I had not fully anticipated was the warmth of it. She spoke about Derek, about watching him become a man, about the family they had built and what it meant to see it grow. She said she hadn't always found it easy to welcome change, and she said it with a small, self-deprecating smile that drew soft sounds from the room. She said she hoped this child would know how loved they were by every branch of the family. She said, "And I want Chloe to know, whatever we've been through, that I am so glad she is in this family." Whatever we've been through. 4 words. Casual, soft, almost inaudible inside the warmth of the rest, but loaded exactly the way she loaded things. Whatever we've been through was not an apology. It was a reference. It told the room there had been something. It positioned Patricia as a woman gracious enough to move past it. It positioned me as the cause of whatever we'd been through and the beneficiary of her forgiveness. And 43 women heard it and nodded. I looked at Renata. She had gone still. I looked at Rosalind, who was watching me from near the kitchen with an expression that said, "Now or never." I stood up. It didn't cause immediate alarm. People stand during toasts. Patricia was still at the podium and she looked at me with a composed smile that said she thought I was rising to thank her. "Patricia," I said, my voice was steady. "Thank you, I want to respond to that if I may." "Of course." She gestured graciously, her room, her gesture. I reached under my chair and picked up my bag. I took out the manila envelope. I set it on the table in front of me. "I want to speak to something specific," I said. "Because there are 43 people in this room, and I think most of you deserve an accurate version of the last several months." The room shifted, not loudly. A chair adjusted, a fork set down. Diane looked sideways at the neighbor from 4 streets over. Patricia's smile had not changed yet. She was still reading this as manageable. A pregnant woman getting emotional at her own shower. She had a response ready for that version of events. "In August," I said, "before this pregnancy was publicly announced, before we'd told most of our family, Patricia began sharing a specific piece of information with people in this room and beyond it. She suggested to Gerald's sister, to at least one person in our neighborhood, and to others I may not yet be aware of, that there was reason to doubt whether my husband was the father of this baby." The room went quiet in a specific way. Not surprised silence, some of them already knew. Process silence, the kind that happens when a private understanding becomes a public fact. Patricia moved back from the podium. "Chloe, I'm not finished," I said. She stopped. Something in my voice had changed the architecture of the room. I was not emotional. I was not loud. I was the calmest person at the table, and the room had registered that. "She said this publicly at Jesse Farrow's birthday party in October," I continued. "There is a written, dated, signed account of the exact words she used. That account was prepared by a witness who is in this room today. Renata raised her hand, just barely, not dramatically, but enough. Several heads turned. Diane looked at Renata, then back at me, then at Patricia. In addition, I said, the guest registry for this shower was accessed without my permission from a private online platform in November. The access log shows the account used, the timestamp, and the IP address associated with Patricia's home network. I opened the envelope. I placed the registry screenshot on the table. This was not curiosity. The registry was accessed the same week that 3 people in this room received personal texts from Patricia suggesting that Derek and I were, quote, working through things. Diane's face had changed. She was looking at Patricia now, not at me. I also want to be very clear about one thing, I said, because the accusation at the center of all of this is specific, and I want to answer it specifically. I reached into the envelope and removed the lab cover sheet. I held it up. I did not wave it. I simply held it. This is the cover sheet from a paternity test conducted at a licensed medical lab in September. The result is conclusive. The father of this baby is my husband. That has never been in question. The only question has been whether Patricia's version of events would be allowed to travel far enough and long enough that the truth would need to be shouted rather than simply stated. I set the sheet on the table. I looked directly at Patricia. For the first time in 3 years, she had nothing to arrange her face around. The composure was still technically present, the muscles were doing what they'd been trained to do, but behind it was something different. A recalculation happening in real time. She was looking at the lab sheet, then at Renata, then at Diane, whose expression was no longer soft. "That's not," Patricia started. "Patricia." Rosalind's voice came from near the kitchen. Clear, unhurried, the voice of someone who had known her for 26 years. "Don't," one word, from the one person in the room who had standing to say it, and Patricia stopped. The silence lasted several seconds. Then Diane pushed back from the table slightly, not dramatically, just a few inches. The physical language of someone increasing the distance between themselves and a position they had been holding. The neighbor 4 streets over picked up her phone and looked at it without unlocking it. The gesture of someone who suddenly wanted to be somewhere else. Marla, Derek's cousin, said quietly to no one in particular, "I didn't know any of this." "Most of you didn't," I said. "That's the point. The information you received was selective, and it was sent privately so that no one could check it against a different source. I am not telling you how to feel about Patricia. I am telling you what is documented and true, so that you can decide for yourselves what the last several months have been about." I sat down. My hands were completely steady. I had not cried. I had not raised my voice. I had shown 3 documents and said a name 3 times in a room full of people who had been carrying her version of the story for months. Patricia remained standing near the podium. She looked at Renata once more, then at the lab sheet on the table. "I was trying to protect my son," she said. Her voice had changed. The warmth was gone. What was left was something thinner and more honest. "From what?" Rosalind said, still from near the kitchen, still completely steady. Patricia had no answer. The shower did not continue in any functional sense after that. The caterer brought out another round of food that no one touched. Small conversations started and stopped. People gathered their things in a way that looked gradual but moved quickly. Renata came to stand beside me and squeezed my hand once. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Diane left without speaking to Patricia. She stopped at my chair first. She said, "I owe you an apology. I should have asked more questions." Then she picked up her bag and walked out. The neighbor 4 streets over left without stopping at my chair at all, which was its own kind of statement. Marla stayed until nearly everyone was gone. She sat across from me and said, "I'm going to call Derek." I told her I thought that was a good idea. Patricia remained near the podium for a long time. The room emptied around her. Her cream blazer, her done hair, her careful arrangement of flowers and seating charts and coordinated texts, all of it still technically present, stripped of its purpose. At some point, one of the catering staff began quietly clearing the table. Patricia watched this happen. I didn't look at her directly again. I didn't need to. I packed Renata's written statement back into the envelope. I left the registry screenshot on the table and the lab cover sheet beside it, not as ammunition, as record, as the simply stated, documented, plainly public truth that she had spent months trying to make impossible. I texted Derek, "Come get me." He pulled up 4 minutes later. I got into the passenger seat. He looked at my face and understood that something had ended. "She okay?" he asked, and I knew he meant his mother. "She's standing," I said. He pulled away from the curb. The peonies were still on the tables, the white tablecloths, the small podium near the window, everything still arranged. Nobody left to be arranged for. Derek didn't say much on the drive home. He asked twice if I was okay. Both times I said yes. The second time, he nodded like he believed me but was still working through something of his own. He called Patricia that evening. I heard him in the next room for 40 minutes. Not the words, mostly. Just his voice, lower than usual, pauses longer than usual, the particular cadence of a conversation that has moved out of the range of comfort into something he could not manage smoothly. When he came back to the kitchen, he sat down across from me. "She said she was protecting me. I know that's what she said. I told her that wasn't her decision to make." He looked at the table. "She told Renata, at a party, in front of people." According to Renata's written account. 3 other people were within earshot. He was quiet for a long time. "How long did you know?" "I started finding pieces in October. I was certain by November." "You could have told me. You would have managed it. You would have called her, walked her through it, found a frame that made it smaller. And then those 43 people would still be carrying her version of events, and I would have had no way to correct it without going through you first." He didn't argue. He understood it, even if understanding it cost him something. "She has to stop," he said finally. "Not a conversation about it, not a process, she stops." That was the first consequence. Not dramatic, not loud. Just Derek at the kitchen table saying she stops in a voice that meant exactly that. Diane sent a handwritten note 4 days later, 3 paragraphs. She said she had replayed the last several months and was embarrassed by how easily she had absorbed one-sided information. She said she respected what it had taken to speak directly rather than privately. She said the note wasn't enough, but she wanted to send it anyway. I kept it. Sandra, the neighbor 4 streets over whose name I only learned afterward, didn't send a note. But she stopped when she saw me at the mailbox about a week later and said, "I shouldn't have passed anything along. I'm sorry." Then she walked back to her house without waiting for a response. That brief, uncomfortable acknowledgement was its own form of correction. 43 people had been in that room. I didn't hear from all of them. I hadn't expected to. But the network Patricia had built over those months, the personal texts, the individual coffees, the soft, sympathetic framing, had been constructed on one specific assumption: that no one would ever compare notes. That each person would carry their concern in isolation, and the only shape the story would ever take was the one Patricia had given it. That assumption had broken in one afternoon in front of white tablecloths and pale pink peonies. People compared notes. Quietly, in the days following, Marla called Derek and stayed on the phone with him for close to an hour. Renata told me later that 2 women she had never met before the shower reached out to her separately, both asking versions of the same question. Did she really say that at the birthday party? Yes, Renata told each of them. That is exactly what she said. That is exactly why I wrote it down. Patricia's book club met 3 weeks after the shower. Diane texted me afterward and said simply, "I think she's beginning to understand the cost." She didn't elaborate. I didn't ask her to. The practical consequence arrived by letter, which surprised me. Patricia had been named as a recipient on a savings bond account that Derek's Aunt Louisa had set up when Derek was a child, a small thing, intended to pass loosely to the family in that old-fashioned way that had never been formally structured. Louisa had been at the shower. She was one of the women I hadn't recognized from the seating chart, small, late 60s, sitting near the window. She hadn't spoken during the confrontation. But she had watched everything. She updated the account documentation the following month. She sent Derek a copy. She sent Patricia a copy. She did not include an explanation letter. She didn't need to. The change in the paperwork was its own explanation. Derek told me without fanfare. He left the copy on the kitchen counter. I read it once and set it down. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was the particular flatness that arrives when something that should have been simple, a family, a pregnancy, a mother-in-law who decided to welcome you, becomes 2 years of documentation and damage and a letter on a counter that means someone lost something real. Patricia and Derek moved into a different structure after that. Monthly dinners instead of weekly. Calls, not drop-ins. She was there when our son was born, briefly, in the hallway, not in the room, and she held him in the hospital afterward with the careful, contained manner of someone who understood that access now had conditions attached to it. She never, as far as I know, corrected the record formally. She didn't apologize to Renata. She didn't send a note to Diane. The closest she came was at a family dinner 8 weeks after the shower, when she and I were alone in the kitchen for a moment, and she said, quietly, without looking directly at me, "I handled it badly. Not I was wrong, not I'm sorry for what I said about your child, just I handled it badly, as if the problem were execution rather than intent." "Yes," I said, "you did." And I went back to the table. Some things don't resolve. They renegotiate into a shape that is livable, even if it isn't whole. Our son was born in April. He was healthy and loud and looked, in the first hours, unmistakably like Derek, so starkly, so almost comically that I laughed in the recovery room until Derek looked at me like I had lost some remaining portion of my mind. We named him after Derek's father, who had died the year before we met. It was a name Patricia loved. I had chosen it before any of this happened, because it was a good name and Derek's stories about his father were the kind that made you wish you'd known the person. I kept the name. Some things should not be contaminated by someone else's bad behavior. He is almost a year old now. He sits up on his own and watches everything with an expression that suggests he is evaluating the world and reserving judgment. I understand that feeling completely. I went back to work when he was 6 weeks old. That first morning, the highway opening up ahead, early light coming across the fields in long, flat streaks, the mountains sitting blue in the distance, felt like something I hadn't been sure I would reach. Not because of the pregnancy, because somewhere in those months I had spent a significant amount of energy wondering whether the version of me that existed in other people's minds was ever going to be correctable. It was correctable. It required documentation and a room full of people and a witness who showed up and a sealed lab envelope and one moment of standing at the right time and refusing to let the story close in the shape someone else had written it. But it was correctable. The envelope is in a filing cabinet in our home office. The registry access log, the lab cover sheet, Renata's written statement, the seating chart, the coordination emails, the forwarded text from Diane's chain. I don't look at it often. I don't need to. It's there because things that are documented are harder to rewrite, And I learned in those months that the people most committed to a false version of events are also the most capable of outlasting your patience if you haven't made the truth undeniable. I made it undeniable.